Wire transfer confirmation came through at 6:37 in the evening, and I remember standing just outside the restaurant's front entrance, phone pressed to my ear, watching the last of the October light drain out of the sky over Portland. 41 years. That's how long I had run Caldwell Precision, a machine parts manufacturing company I had started in a rented warehouse with 2 employees and a second-hand CNC lathe. And now, just like that, it was someone else's. 41 years, and the number on my phone screen said $4.7 million. Not life-changing for some people, maybe, but for a 67-year-old man who had grown up in a 2-bedroom house in Beaverton, Oregon, with a father who worked the night shift at a paper mill, it was everything. I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket and pushed back through the heavy oak door into Hargrove's, one of those old-money steakhouses in the Pearl District with dark wood paneling and waiters who speak quietly and move like they're trying not to wake someone. My daughter had picked it. She always had good taste. I used to think that was something I'd given her. She was sitting across from her husband, and they both looked up when I came back to the table. She was smiling. He was smiling, too, but his smile always reminded me a little of a man trying to remember the punchline to a joke he'd already told. "Everything good?" she asked. "Everything's done," I said, and I sat down and picked up my wine glass, and she reached across and squeezed my hand, and I thought I genuinely believed that this was one of the best nights of my life. I want you to understand that. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to know that I was a happy man sitting at that table. I had no reason to be anything else. My daughter's name is Sonia. She's 38. She has her mother's dark eyes and, as I later understood, her stepfather's appetite for shortcuts. Her mother and I divorced when Sonia was 11, and I won't pretend the years after were easy. There were stretches where she lived with her mother full-time, and I got every other weekend and 2 weeks in the summer, and those 2 weeks were the longest weeks of my year in the best possible way. I drove her to soccer practice. I taught her to fish at Hag Lake. I helped her study for the SAT even though I barely remembered algebra. When she graduated from Oregon State, I cried in the parking lot after the ceremony where no one could see me. Her husband, I'll call him by his first name, which is Troy, came into her life about 6 years ago. He sold commercial real estate and he was good at it, or at least he was good at seeming good at it, where I understand now is a different thing entirely. I didn't dislike him at first. He was polished in the way that men who sell things for a living are polished. He laughed at the right moments. He remembered what you told him last time, but there was something about the way he looked at me sometimes. Quick, assessing. The way you might size up a piece of furniture you were thinking about moving that I never quite settled with. When Caldwell Precision started getting acquisition offers 2 years ago, I told Sonia first. She cried a little on the phone and said she was proud of me and that she loved me. And I told her I loved her too, and I meant it. 3 months later, she told me that Troy thought it would be a good idea for him to look over any offers before I signed anything, since he had experience with commercial transactions. I thanked her and told her I already had an attorney. She dropped it. I thought I had. The waiter at Hargrove's that night was a young man, late 20s, maybe 30, with sandy hair and the careful, attentive manner of someone who takes his work seriously. He had introduced himself when we sat down. His name was Elliot, not the same Elliot from any story you've heard before. This was just a young man doing his job well in a good restaurant on a Tuesday night. I noticed him watching our table once while I was at the bar getting a glass of water while waiting for my call to connect. He was standing near the service station about 15 feet away, and something in his posture was off. He wasn't moving, just standing very still, eyes on our table. I didn't think much of it then. I went outside. I got my good news. I came back in. About 20 minutes after I returned to the table, Elliot came around to refill our water glasses. He leaned down when he reached my side and said, very quietly, close enough that I could hear him over the murmur of the restaurant, "I need to speak with you privately, sir, when you have a moment. It's important." His voice was steady. Not nervous, not dramatic, just certain in a way that made the back of my neck tighten. I excused myself to use the restroom. He met me in the hallway by the coat check. "I'm sorry to do this," he said. "I don't know how to say it except to say it. While you were outside, I saw the woman at your table. Your daughter, I believe, take something from her purse and put it in your wine glass, a small vial. She did it quickly, but I was watching from the station and I saw it clearly." I looked at him. He didn't look away. "Are you certain?" I asked. "Yes, sir," he said. "I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't certain." I stood in that hallway for a moment that felt much longer than it was. The sound of silverware and conversation drifted back from the dining room. I thanked him, and I walked back to the table, and I sat down, and I looked at my daughter's face across the candlelight, and she smiled at me. I picked up my water glass, and I knocked it over. It wasn't an accident, though I made it look like one. The small splash it caused gave me exactly enough cover to reach across and swap my wine glass with hers, setting her glass in my original spot and mine in front of her, under the guise of moving things around while Elliot came over with a cloth to clean up. He saw what I'd done. I could tell by the almost imperceptible pause before he began wiping down the table. "No harm done," Troy said cheerfully. "None at all," I agreed. "We had dinner. I didn't drink from what had been Sonia's glass. I ordered a bourbon instead and nursed it through the entree." Troy talked about a commercial property he had a client interested in out in Lake Oswego. Sonia talked about wanting to redecorate the living room. I made the sounds of a man enjoying an evening with his family. 17 minutes after she drank from her wine glass, Sonia's face changed. It was subtle at first. She touched her temple, then blinked a few times too many. Then she set down her fork and put both hands flat on the table and said, "I feel strange." I watched Troy's face. He didn't go pale. He went very, very still. "I think I need some air," she said. Her words were already beginning to thicken. "We should call someone," I said, pulling out my phone. "She's fine," Troy said immediately and firmly. "She just needs some air. Let's get her outside." "She's not fine," I said. "I'm calling 911. What happened next I've turned over in my mind many times since. Troy reached across the table and put his hand over my phone. He didn't press hard, but he pressed, and he said, again very quietly, "She doesn't need an ambulance. She needs fresh air. Let's not make a scene." I looked at him across the table. I thought about 41 years of work. I thought about a number on a phone screen. I thought about the way he used to look at me sometimes, like a piece of furniture. I dialed anyway. Troy stood up. For a moment, I thought he was going to walk out. Instead, he said in a completely different voice, lighter, almost pleasant, "You know what? You're right. Better safe than sorry." And he sat back down, and by that time, Sonia had slid sideways in her chair, and I was on the phone with the dispatcher, and Elliot was already standing at the edge of the table asking if we needed him to clear a path. The paramedics were there in 6 minutes. At the hospital, while Sonia was being stabilized in the emergency room, I pulled Elliot aside in the waiting area. He had followed in his car. He didn't say why. He just showed up, still in his white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. I asked him if he would be willing to give a statement to the police. He said yes without hesitating. "You could lose your job," I said. "Maybe," he said. "But I've been a waiter for 8 years. I think I know what I saw." The detectives came that night. They took statements from both of us. They secured the wine glass, which Elliot had quietly set aside and covered after he cleared the table. They spoke with Troy for a long time in a small room off the waiting area, and when they came out, Troy's polished manner had gone somewhere I couldn't see. I sat in a plastic chair in a hospital hallway at 11 o'clock at night with a cup of bad coffee, and I thought about Sonia at 11 years old, learning to bait a hook at Hag Lake, refusing to let me do it for her, insisting she could manage the worm herself, and eventually she did. The toxicology report came back 2 days later. The substance was a sedative compound, not immediately lethal in the dose she'd administered, but combined with alcohol and her smaller body weight, it had been intended to produce a prolonged loss of consciousness. What would have happened to me? 67 years old, was a heart condition I'd been managing for 4 years, would likely have been categorized as a medical event. Natural causes, $4.7 million. That's what my life was apparently worth to them. The financial piece unraveled over the following weeks, and it was worse than I had imagined, which is saying something, because I had started imagining very dark things. Troy had been, for the past 14 months, quietly establishing the groundwork for a power of attorney claim. He had spoken to an estate attorney, not mine, a different one, someone he'd found through a client, about the process for assuming control of assets in the event of incapacitation. He had done this without telling Sonia everything, I later learned. or at least without telling her all of it. He had told her the plan was to ensure I was taken care of if something happened. He had told her the sedative was just to make me sleep, that it wouldn't really hurt me, that it would just give them time. Time for what, exactly? I asked my attorney later. Time to file the paperwork, she said, quietly. My attorney is a woman named Harriet. Sharp, plain-spoken, the kind of lawyer who doesn't soften things unnecessarily. She had been my attorney for 11 years, and she had tried twice to get me to update my estate documents to more clearly exclude Troy from any decision-making role. I had not listened carefully enough both times. I was listening very carefully now. Troy was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal conspiracy, and one count related to the administration of a controlled substance. Sonia was charged separately. Her charges were lesser. The prosecution had decided she had been, to some degree, manipulated, but they were real. She spent 2 nights in county holding before her bail was posted. I paid the bail. I'm still not entirely sure why. Old habit, maybe. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to know yet exactly what I would feel if I left her there. I visited her once while the case was pending, at the house she and Troy had rented in southeast Portland. Troy was gone, staying with his brother in Bend, I'd heard. The house looked the same as it always had. There was a plant in the kitchen window she'd had for years, a pothos that had grown so long the vines draped across the counter. I had given her that plant when she moved into her first apartment. She sat across from me at her kitchen table and did not try to explain. She just said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I looked at my daughter for a long time. She looked older than 38. She looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a while and was only now starting to set it down. "Were you scared?" I asked. "While you were doing it." She looked at the table. "Yes. Then why?" She didn't answer that, not directly. She talked about Troy, about the pressure, about believing at some level that it wouldn't really hurt me, that the money would fix everything. I recognized the shape of what she was describing, even if I couldn't forgive it yet. I had known men like Troy before. I had just never expected one of them to be sitting at my dinner table. I told her I would not be testifying against her. I told her that if she cooperated fully with the prosecution, against Troy, against everything, I would remain in contact. I told her I was not promising her anything about what our relationship would look like on the other side of all this, but that I was not closing the door. She cried. I did not. I drove home across the Burnside Bridge with the city lights on the river and the radio off, and I sat in my driveway for a while before going inside. Troy took a plea. 18 months, plus restitution, plus 3 years of supervised release. His attorney tried to argue that the plan had never been intended to cause serious harm. The judge, a quiet-spoken man in his 60s who reminded me a little of my father, said that intent was not determined by what someone told themselves at the time, but by what the likely outcome would have been. I was not in the courtroom. Harriet represented my interests. I was at my house in the West Hills reorganizing my garage, which I had been meaning to do for 4 years. I built a workbench. I threw away 3 boxes of things I'd been keeping for no particular reason. At 2 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Harriet. It said, "Done. Call me when you're ready." I set the phone on the workbench and finished hanging up the last of my hand tools before I called her back. 3 months later, I hired Elliot. He hadn't lost his job at Hargrove's. His manager had actually commended him privately, but he had been quietly thinking about a change. I run a small consulting operation now, a much quieter thing than Caldwell Precision ever was, helping small manufacturers navigate acquisitions. I needed someone organized and honest and capable of paying close attention to what was happening in a room. He took the job. He's worked for me for 8 months now. He's good at it. He doesn't miss much. I told him once that what he did that night in the restaurant took something most people don't have. He waved it off the way young people do when they don't want to make a thing of something. "You look like someone's dad," he said. I couldn't just watch. I thought about that more than I've told him. Sonia completed her cooperation agreement and avoided prison time. She's in a program. Counseling, structured accountability, the kind of thing that only works if you actually want it to work. I don't know yet if she wants it to. We talk on the phone about once a month. Short calls, mostly. She asks how I am. I tell her. I ask how she is. She tells me. We are building something, or we are finding out that we can't. I don't know which yet, and I've decided that's all right. Not everything resolves cleanly. Some things just have to stay open for a while, like a window in October, letting in the cold air and whatever light is left. I still have the pothos plant. I took it from her kitchen the day I visited. She didn't object. It's on my kitchen counter now, the vines draped over the edge, longer than ever. It needs repotting. I keep meaning to get to it. Maybe this weekend.